For almost 800 years, it's been one of the most imposing fortresses in Northern Europe, controlling access to the Baltic Sea. For the last 80, it's been under Soviet-Russian control, and for the last 20, it's been Russia's lone outpost in the heart of NATO lands, jutting out rudely like a ripe pimple surrounded by unblemished skin, just itching to be popped. Now, a top US general says that NATO can do exactly that, and not in weeks or even days, but in a matter of hours. Seizing Kaliningrad in a lightning-fast operation would change the security balance in Europe in the blink of an eye. It could make NATO impregnable on its northeastern flank, but it could also provoke a nuclear war. So let's take a closer look at the story and why it's important. Kaliningrad Oblast is the westernmost province of the Russian Federation, and the only one that isn't directly connected to other Russian lands. Between it and mainland Russia lie the nation of Belarus and a 62-mile strip of Lithuania called the Suwalki Gap, which is central to our story, as you'll discover a little later on. Despite its physical disconnection from the rest of the country, or maybe because of it, Kaliningrad forms a vital piece of Russia's security blanket, both offensively and defensively. The enclave sits in a highly strategic location, wedged between Lithuania and Poland at the base of the Baltic Sea, otherwise known as NATO's lake. It only covers 87 square miles in total area and is 47 miles across at its widest point. Yet, from this position, an army can project power across vast and strategically important areas. Nautically, it's the ideal position from which to project power across the Baltic Sea and control access to it. Inland, an army with effective anti-access, aerial denial or A2AD capabilities can cut off access from Poland and Belarus into the Baltic states and Finland. Little wonder then that it's basically been a fortress since the early Middle Ages, although it's only been called Kaliningrad since 1945. In 1255, during the Northern Crusades, the Teutonic Knights founded a new fortress on the site of the ancient old Prussian settlement Twangster, to which they had just laid waste. They named it Königsberg, which translates to King's Mountain, in honour of King Ottokar II of Bohemia. Besides a period in the 1400s when it fell under Polish rule and was known as Królewicz, the city remained under German or Prussian control and retained the name Königsberg up until World War II. As Germany's largest easternmost city and a key hub, the city took a serious beating as the German army collapsed in the latter part of the war. First, it was battered by Allied bombing in 1944. Then, much of what was left of it was turned to rubble during the Battle of Königsberg, which ended with its capture by the Soviets on the 9th of April 1945. The Potsdam Agreement of 1945 formally placed it under Soviet administration, and they renamed it to Kaliningrad the following year in honor of Mikhail Kalinin, chairman of the Presidium of the Supreme Soviet, who had recently died. At the time, the city's inhabitants were primarily Germans with a Lithuanian minority. Many of their families had been there for centuries. Over the next few years, the Soviets shipped all the Germans out to Germany, with only the Lithuanians allowed to remain. They then shipped truckloads, or more precisely trainloads full of Soviets in, mostly Russians, but also some Ukrainians and Belarusians, and set about rebuilding the city on top of the ruins. Today, it's a modern Russian city, with a population of around 489,000 in the oblast, concentrated mostly in the city. As Russian cities go, it's not too shabby, even with the economic problems caused by the war, which are felt acutely here too. There are universities and sushi bars, the views are lovely, and there's a busy, bustling port, the only Russian port that remains ice-free all year round in fact. So, despite the fact that there were a great deal more tourists before Russia invaded Ukraine, there are many worse places you can live in Russia than Kaliningrad. That is, if you don't mind living in one of the most heavily militarized areas in Europe. In Kaliningrad, the Russian military is everywhere. We're talking the Baltic Fleet, including submarines, squadrons of aircraft, battalions of S-400 air defense systems, numerous Iskander missile systems, and at least 10,000 troops. You name it, it's there, including nukes. That's why it's so important for both Russia and NATO, and why general statements about NATO being able to seize Kaliningrad in a flash are so intriguing. Donahue, who is the commander of the US Army for Europe and Africa, made these remarks on Wednesday at the Association of the US Army's inaugural Land Euro Conference in Wiesbaden, Germany. The conference aims to be the premier event in the European theatre of operations for military professionals, industry leaders, and government officials. It's a venue for them to come together to discuss the latest developments in army technology, strategy, and policy. Kaliningrad is roughly 47 miles wide and surrounded by NATO on all sides. According to Donahue, the army and its allies now have the capability to take that down from the ground in a time frame that's unheard of and faster than we've ever been able to do. We've already planned that and we've already developed it. The mass and momentum problem that Russia poses to us, we've developed the capability to make sure that we can stop that mass and momentum problem. He made these comments in the context of a new Eastern Flank Deterrence Line plan that aims to enhance ground-based capabilities and drive military-industrial interoperability across the alliance. As the name suggests, the new strategy is focused on the Baltic states, Poland, and NATO's newest member, Finland. Although Poland doesn't share a border with Russia directly, it does with Belarus, and since Belarus and Russia are joined into a union state, it's pretty much the same thing. That means all 5 of these countries, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, and Finland, are NATO's frontline states on the east. This is why the Suwalki Gap is so important for both sides. It's worth mentioning that the problem of Kaliningrad and the Suwalki Gap could have been avoided completely. In the 1950s, Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev offered the entire Kaliningrad Oblast to the Lithuanian Soviet Socialist Republic. But the long-standing secretary of the Communist Party in Lithuania, Antanas Šnikus, refused to accept the territory because it would add at least 1 million ethnic Russians to Lithuanian proper. So the enclave remained a part of the Russian SSR and became part of the Russian Federation when the Soviet Union disbanded. At the same time, the Suwalki Gap became part of independent Lithuania, which of course later joined NATO, enjoying the protection of the alliance's Article 5 mutual defense obligations. Today, in the event of a confrontation between Russia and NATO, if Russia closed the corridor, it would effectively prevent NATO forces from reaching the Baltic states and Finland by land without invading Belarus. And Russia's A2AD capabilities are substantial on both sides of the gap. In Kaliningrad, but even more so in Belarus, which can be much more easily reinforced. As per Donahue, regional plans have been coming together for some time, but the army, along with NATO, is first focusing on the Baltic states to try to get to how do you actually make it so that industry and the nations know exactly what the requirements are. We know what we have to develop, and the use case that we're using is you have to deter from the ground. In case you were wondering how the army is intending to take Kaliningrad out so rapidly, perhaps surprisingly, it's primarily from the ground. That could be a game changer given Russia's defences, which we'll cover a little later. As Donahue puts it, the land domain is not becoming less important, it's becoming more important. You can now take down A2AD bubbles from the ground. You can now take over sea from the ground. All of those things we're watching happen in Ukraine. He's not wrong. Consider how Ukraine managed to send Russia's Black Sea fleet packing with its soggy tail between its legs from Crimea, essentially without the use of an air force or a navy. Drones, naval drones and missiles, all launched from the land, proved effective enough. Indeed, unmanned systems form a large part of the plan outlined by Donahue. But the main thrust seems to be developing standardized data-driven systems, common launchers and cloud-based coordination between the collaborating nations and equipment. It's a futuristic integrated modular system designed for maximum interoperability and power projection, but with minimum complication and ideally cost. The plan appears to have been agreed upon. Now the soliciting for and procurement of the systems required to make it work begin. The data sharing system has actually already been secured by NATO, namely Palantir's Maven smart system. The system is at the heart of Project Maven, which is officially known as the Algorithmic Warfare Cross-Functional Team. The US Army is often really smart when it comes to naming things so that they have snappy acronyms when abbreviated. But AWCFT is pretty clunky, whatever your native tongue, so Project Maven it is. Not that the name is without relevance. Project Maven is a Pentagon project that uses machine learning and data fusion to process data from many sources. It then uses the processed data to identify potential targets, display information through a user interface, and transmit human decisions to weapon systems, among other functions. The project has been run by the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency since 2022, with the main data fusion platform made and run by Palantir, the Maven smart system. Maven's data sources include photographs, satellite imagery, and geolocation data from communications intercepts, infrared sensors, synthetic aperture radar, and the like. The training dataset included at least 4 million images of military objects, such as warships, all labeled by humans. Machine learning systems, including object recognition systems, then process the data, which enables Maven to identify potential targets, such as enemy tanks or the location of new military facilities. In Maven's user interface, you can reportedly see aircraft movements, logistics, locations of key personnel, locations on the no-strike list, ships, and much more. Yellow outlined boxes show potential targets, while blue outlined boxes show friendly forces or no-strike zones. Crucially, in the context of the Eastern Flank Deterrence Line, it can also transmit human decisions to fire weapons directly to them. Even better, Maven has already proven its stripes on the battlefield. During the 2021 Kabul airlift, as the US beat a hasty retreat from a disintegrating Afghanistan, Maven was used to display the situation on the ground. It could simultaneously display data feeds such as aircraft movements, logistic threats, and locations of key personnel like General Donahue, who was personally involved in this operation. Throughout the Russia-Ukraine war, the US has also used satellite intelligence in conjunction with Maven to supply the locations of Russian equipment to Ukrainian forces. Shortly afterwards, said equipment goes boom. Maven was further used for narrowing targets for airstrikes in Iraq and Syria in February 2024, and for locating rocket launchers in Yemen and surface vessels in the Red Sea, according to CENTCOM. So it seems a no-brainer for Maven to be used for Eastern Flank Deterrence Line operations too, and it's easy to see how useful it would be in informing and coordinating attack on Kaliningrad. As for the other components of the system, they're in the works. We already know exactly what we have to do with cloud, and we know exactly the type of actual unmanned systems, brigades, everything else that we need for that, according to Donahue. Specifically, the Army wants these capabilities to be interoperable with NATO partners. Central to this plan are a common launcher that can serve in both an offensive and defensive capacity, and a fire control system that any nation can use. We want it to be one system, optionally manned, where we'll be able to take munitions from any country and shoot through them, he said. It all sounds rather exciting, and it'll be interesting to see which systems and what standards are ultimately agreed upon. Unfortunately, if entirely predictably and understandably, Donahue didn't provide any additional details about how this system might be used to take Kaliningrad, especially to seize it in less time than it takes a Ukrainian FPV drone operator to permanently retire a piece of Russian armor. The enclave is certainly not the flimsiest nut to crack. From the 1990s through early 2016, Kaliningrad's military forces were relatively weak, but by 2021 had been seriously upgraded with heavy and diverse armaments. Although it's hard to tell exactly through the fog of war, in 2023, the 11th Army Corps, numbering between 12,000 and 18,000, were based there, equipped with T-72 tanks, BTK armoured personal carriers, mobile rocket launchers, and artillery. The heavily mechanized 336 Guards Naval Infantry Brigade was also based in the Oblast, with BTR armoured personnel carriers and at least one battalion reportedly capable of air assault. However, according to Polish Foreign Minister Radoslaw Sikorski, Russia has withdrawn a significant part of these troops from the Kaliningrad region to redeploy them for other missions. He stated this during the NATO summit in The Hague on June 25, adding that, additionally, Russia is forced to form new units along the border with Finland, which stretches its forces. Previously, in August 2024, Raimundo Vishnuru, commander of the Lithuanian Armed Forces, also reported that Russia had been compelled to redeploy troops from Kaliningrad. In that case, it was due to the Ukrainian incursion into Kursk, which was in full flow at the time. So, how much manpower remains in the enclave is an open question. However, the 4 squadrons of aircraft that were known to be stationed in Kaliningrad in 2023, including a mix of Su-30SM, Su-24 and Su-27 jets, still appear to be there. It's also quite likely that some of the latest Su-35s have been added to that mix, and that's a robust air and missile defense, including at least 4 battalions of the S-400 SAM system. Russia's Baltic Fleet also continues to be largely based out of Kaliningrad and appears to have been largely unaffected by the war in Ukraine. Given the fate of the Black Sea Fleet, it's understandable why Russia has kept this part of its navy well away from the war. In 2022, the Baltic Fleet contained 52 surface warships, including 4 of the new cruise missile-armed Steregushki-class corvettes, 1 Kilo-class submarine, and numerous support vessels. 2 of the fleet's Bayern-class corvettes are also known to be able to mount the Caliber land attack cruise missile. More on that shortly. To support the fleet, the enclave also hosts at least 1 land-based anti-ship Bastion P missile system, which uses Onyx P-800 missiles, which have a range of 75 to 210 nautical miles. But arguably, the most problematic element of Kaliningrad's defense setup from NATO's perspective is the land-based systems for Iskander ballistic missiles. There are believed to be dozens of these systems present in Kaliningrad, both of the Iskander M and Iskander K varieties. With a range of around 300 miles, the Iskander M systems provide missile coverage of a large part of Poland, Lithuania, and the majority of Latvia, as well as Danish Bornholm. Production on the latest versions of these missiles has reportedly ramped up to 750 during 2025, and Russia has been using its stockpiles relatively sparingly in Ukraine during the same period. So, it's likely there are a few hundred available for A2AD operations to close the Suwałki Gap and beyond. Oh, and did we mention they're nuclear capable? With that in mind, the Iskander K complexes are even more of a problem. They can also be used to launch, among other things, the Caliber land attack cruise missile, which has a range of over 1,550 miles. That brings most key European NATO capitals well within range. At around 1,350 miles each, London and Paris are at the outer reaches, but Stockholm, Copenhagen and Berlin are less than 900 miles away, and Helsinki is only around 680. NATO doesn't have an equivalent at this stage. That kind of capability is precisely why the speed at which NATO could take Kaliningrad, if it came to that, might be really important. You'd want to take out most of those launchers and their guidance systems before Russia had a chance to activate them. That's where automated, intelligent, flexible and cost-effective systems like the one Donahue revealed could make all the difference, both in the planning and operational phases. Russia, for its part, reacted as expected to Donahue's comments. The first comment came from Leonid Slutsky, the chairman of the International Affairs Committee of the Russian State Duma, the lower house of parliament. Technically, as leader of the Liberal Democratic Party of Russia, he's an opposition figure. An attack on the Kaliningrad region will mean an attack on Russia, with all due retaliatory measures stipulated, among other things, by its nuclear doctrine. The US general should take this into account before making such statements, he told Russian news agency TASS. Putin has been widely condemned for nuclear saber rattling over, for example, the granting of permission to Ukraine to strike targets deep inside Russia with NATO-supplied weapons. He's also been ridiculed for not following through every time another red line gets crossed without a nuclear response. However, in the case of Kaliningrad, there's reason to believe any preemptive move by NATO would provoke a regrettable response. It's just too valuable to Russia, strategically, economically, and historically. Now, any NATO attack on Kaliningrad would thus seriously risk a nuclear response, especially if it's as devastating as Donahue claims. All the more reason to make sure that when that system is fully operational, its bite is as nasty as its bark. We'll keep you posted as the story unfolds, so hit the subscribe button to make sure you don't miss out. Thanks for watching.